All right, we are back for episode 127 of Digital Divination.
127, that's great. You know, it's also great that I work for Wizards of the Coast. The opinions I express here are mine and not theirs.
Good thing, yeah.
Smooth. Smooth as silk, Ron.
This episode brought to you by, Oraxo Cleaners. Clean your starships with the best of them.
Oh, that's interesting. And, we're going through a Cosmic Birthday, and one of the things that we got engaged in was some, I think a little bit of spoilers are going to be okay, but I'll just warn that, was dealing with some advertisements. And we got to hear Jason go ahead and do some of his advertising voices for that as well.
It has been a delight, yes.
Yeah, I thought that was a lot of fun.
That's been fun.
And speaking of sort of delightful Starfinder second edition things, I thought we could talk about creating Starfinder second edition monsters. And we've talked about monsters a little bit when we created our what do we call that turkey? What type of turkey was it?
I don't remember what
Did you see what
Turkinator.
though? Did you see that
Ryan?
What?
Well, Ryan pulled something.
Ryan pulled something together to be the art.
Yeah. When he posted it on Facebook. Yeah, and I just been looking at all the various things that we have out there for Starfinder second edition and thinking about coming up with creatures and whatnot. For whatever reason, I might be doing that. There's some in Second Contact, right? So that has a variety of ranges. And there's some in the playtest adventures that are out there. But that's not a lot. There's no monster core or alien core. I don't know what we're going to call this thing, right? There's no thing for Starfinder second edition out yet, and it's not been announced. I have no idea when that's going to come.
I think it has been announced that it's going to be called Alien Archive, just like the first edition. I thought I remembered seeing that someplace. That was
I don't remember, and it didn't have core on it, so I don't know.
I don't know.
Isn't everything?
I know what it's being called, and now I have to double check, but I don't think you're correct.
Okay, well, there's the
I'll
biggest
just say that
proof
much.
that in fact I'm not working with inside information in that I'm just flat out wrong.
and I don't even know. And I don't. Yeah, so I don't know that's been announced. I don't know.
It's not been announced.
I mean, we all know it's going to come, right? We know it's coming sometime.
There has
Of
to
course,
be.
we don't know,
right?
Right after
you gotta have a monster.
There's going to be a book of aliens, some sort of
Exactly.
alien core.
So, but if you were playing second edition like soon, right, and you wanted monsters, you got a couple different places you can go, right? You could, or a couple ways you could go about doing that. Obviously, you can take the ones already out for the playtest, but there are a range of levels, and it's not enough of one level really to have a whole adventure from Second Contact and the ones in the adventures already. Otherwise, you just basically go through the same thing. So that's one thing you could do. The other thing you could do is you got Monster Core, and you could bring in those monsters because they've already kind of been mechanically set up in the same system for challenge rating and stuff.
Let me ask Jason exactly that. At the risk of being spoiled, I haven't looked in Cosmic Birthday or any of these. Do they point you to the Monster Core for anything?
You know what?
Or
I'm
do
not
they reproduce
sure, but
all the stats for everything that you would need?
I think it's pretty self-contained. It's been mostly robots.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that
and other
those pointed you to that, but I was saying that
you could.
It's one place you could get monsters.
Yeah.
I won't say the name. I won't tell you what the monsters, but here's a monster that's definitely in Monster Core, in Cosmic Birthday, and the whole stat block.
So they pulled the whole thing into. So you need see nothing about. I can't say you need see nothing about Pathfinder Second Edition because most of the Starfinder playtest book says go look at the player core.
Player core.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But your point stands. You could go to Monster Core.
Yeah. So you could go to Monster Core. You could use the existing ones, or you could create brand new ones. Right, maybe bringing in Starfinder 1 monsters and converting them, or do
Right.
something just brand new using the rules in the GM core. That kind of gives you challenge rating and what kind of matches up with that. So there's a lot of different ways to go. And one of the things I was wondering is, if you really wanted to have Starfinder be its own Starfinder thing, right? What's
Mhm.
most appropriate, right? If you bring in stuff from Monster Core, well, that's kind of those are Pathfinder things, you know. Maybe you should put a sci-fi skin on them, but then that's a different monster. Yeah. So that's what I've been thinking. That's what I've been wrestling with myself as I'm thinking about monsters and whatnot. And I was wondering what these two folks who know a lot about Starfinder, a lot about Pathfinder and other systems and their monsters, what you all think.
Well, there are certain like things that are kind of like I would say kind of staples that you could do in either like some undead, right? A skeleton is a skeleton, a zombie is a zombie. They're going to kind of act the same way whether or not it's sci-fi or fantasy, right? You might say that the skeleton is an alien skeleton and it has no, it's got a bunch more eye holes in the skull than it would be, or it's got 3 arms or whatever, but for the most part, it's going to be pretty much the same. And yeah, so there's some. I think you can use Monster Core for some real basic beasties, real basic
Yeah,
stuff.
animals are going to be similar, even if they're sort of weird looking.
Animals, yeah, for the most part.
But I see your point. If you're going to be running Starfinder Second Edition for people who've been playing a lot of Pathfinder Second Edition, and especially if you're going to sort of like take the reins as the GM, and sort of your typical GM or two are going to be among your players, then you're in a situation where they kind of already know the monster core. So if you're going to just try to make some sort of, gigantic alien thing and use the stats for ogres or what have you, and
Right.
they might kind of be familiar with all those numbers. So that might make your pool of available monsters feel a little bit smaller, maybe.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, there's a sort of another kind of category that also kind of like stays the same, and that is kind of the eldritch horror
Right.
category, right? Terrible things from beyond space and time, or terrible and from beyond space and time, no matter what time and space you're currently in. So you go out and look at anything that sort of we brought forward from the Cthulhu mythos. You can use. Although for certain things, this vaguely reminds me of this to be on a tangent. Is I was playing a weird Western game, and we had a sort of Lovecraft theme for this campaign, and at one point we came across a Gug, right? The sort of big guys with the split open head, right? And they kind of have 4 arms, but they split at the elbow and not at the
Hmm.
shoulder, kind of thing. Like they just sort of that. But we got in and we're like, oh, and normally these things are just sort of biting and clawing and whatever. But this guy, for whatever reason, had a chain gun. Like an old timey wild because
Yeah.
Wild West, right? He had to have some kind of
Mhm.
firearm, right? And for some reason, he also had a little Confederate hat on, so we knew he was a bad guy. Um, so you could do that with sort of something like this. To take something from the Cthulhu mythos and then just kind of like say, oh well, this is a Gug, but
Right.
he's got a laser cannon and he's going to shoot it at you, right? So or any other sort of intelligent monster might have a gun, and that's not too difficult to slap on. From you just take the stats of the weapon, look at it and see whether or not it needs to be 2 dice or 3 dice or whatever for the whatever level it is, and then just use the numbers for like, any ranged attack it
Hmm.
already has, and just the pluses for that. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of reskinning can help with that too. If you wanted an
Hmm.
alien, if you had the Gug stats in front of you and it's the right level and everything, and knowing that a Gug has sort of this big maw that's head that splits open, which is pretty distinctive, and those strange forearms, like you said, you don't need to describe a Gug. You could describe some sort of alien with a whole bunch of arms. The players are never going to know that can only
Mm.
attack with 4 at one time, and that you're using the Gug stats, especially if you've given it some kind of ranged attack along the lines of a Gug with a chain gun could be any number of multi-limbed horrors with a chain gun. And
Hmm.
Hmm.
just because somebody's
Yeah.
familiar
Yeah.
with the
Yeah. Yeah.
Gug stat block specifically doesn't mean they can't be in for a surprise. Especially when you do sort of the light modifications that sort of that you can do with make a monster elite or the like. Just kind of
Hmm.
bump its numbers
Hmm.
a little bit up or a little
Mhm.
bit down.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point when you mentioned the Gug with a chain gun. It reminds me when you mentioned Gug, I'm thinking Abomination Vaults, right?
Mhm.
There was the Gug in
Mhm.
there. Um, but
Yeah.
in any case, um, in Starfinder, one of the interesting changes, especially going into second edition, is the prevalence of ranged attacks. Like everybody's got ranged
Yeah.
attacks and
Yeah.
things. And if you have a traditional Gug, that's a melee character, right? It's got to beat you
Right.
up and
None of
eat you
those.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. Now you add a ranged attack to it that kind of fits more what the player character is going to do. And I would say, kind of in addition to ranged attack, then you have to look at alternative modes of movement. Like flying is coming much more common in Starfinder Second Edition, even than it was in First Edition. So ranged attacks and flying are two things that I think are going to be much. You have to take those into account with the creatures that you're using
Mhm.
and or developing. So maybe a Gug with a chain gun and a flight pack or something, right?
Right. Or a reaction that lets him swat
Yeah.
someone out of
Oh,
the
that would
air
be
if they
fun. Yeah.
get right.
Yeah.
Some sort of
Right.
Mhm.
counter for the
Right. Right.
flying,
Yeah.
When you
basically.
also want to make
Kind of have
sure that
those.
if you're appending ranged attacks to creatures that generally don't have them, which I think I agree, as you say, you'll be doing very often. I think if you're converting creatures into Starfinder Second Edition because they fighting at ranged is assumed in a lot of cases, make sure that your monster's ranged attacks are on par. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but are on par with its melee attacks, or you risk having the monster be substantially weaker if the foes
Hmm.
are able to get it at range, and it just doesn't feel like it's nearly as much of a challenge. If the Gug with the chain gun is only doing half as much damage as it does with its array of attacks, then people who keep it at range, on one hand, they're being rewarded for keeping an enemy that is ferocious up close at a distance. That's something that should be something they should consider a benefit. Smart play to do that. But on the other hand, you also don't want the monsters to be sort of a damage pushover that the characters don't realize the full danger of confronting them.
Yeah. That's why those charts in GM Core have all that sort of number stuff, right? You look at what kind of damage it does and look at compare it to what it does melee, and then you can kind of fudge, you essentially just fudge the numbers.
Hmm.
Not when you're playing, but when you're
Yep.
writing stuff down, you can be like, oh, it's this many dice plus a number. Like it doesn't necessarily need to follow the same rubric of a player
Right.
character. Like, where are you getting that +6 from? It's a monster. It
Right.
gets plus
Right.
six.
Right.
Right. Or you can do some other stuff too. Like if you just want to give it a normal gun, a normal laser gun, and that does whatever much fire damage plus a little bit of its, maybe it has a little bit of weapon specialization. You can then no, that's still not enough. You can give it some sort of rider to that, so that, or like special action that it does to, maybe not even action, like like it has sneak attack but only with this laser. Like, so when it shoots when a laser someone who's off guard, they take an additional 1d6 fire damage, and that'll sort of help you peanut butter the
Exactly.
numbers
Right.
up,
Right. Right.
basically, as I
Exactly. Any
like to say.
monster that makes a particularly ferocious attack doing mental damage on top of whatever its physical attack is because it's so terrifying in its attack
Yeah.
is a good way to,
Hmm.
I've found, to
Right.
increase some of those numbers.
Hmm. And you could have counters to ranged attack as well. It has some special charge ability, right? That allows it to double move and
Right.
attack, and
Just gets in there.
things like that, or bypass. Yeah. Oh,
Teleport.
yeah. Definitely, it could just teleport behind them and eat them. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that one. That's a good one.
But any monster that you're using sort of at your own tables for your own personal use is the kind of thing you control the environment in a lot better. If you know that a
Right.
creature is going to be fighting in the cramped confines of a space station, it kind of doesn't matter what they can do from 200 feet away. It just
Right.
the fact that they can do is fight up in melee is actually maybe not such a detriment.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. 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 There's a third
Mhm.
thing, but I guess the category, that there are a couple monsters in Monster Core and in the sort of Pathfinder universe that basically fit. Not besides the Eldritch Horrors, there's the related Dominion of the Black creatures, right? Those are space creatures. They're just straight up from space, right? And in Monster Core, there's like 2 spreads of them in here. I was just looking at them. None of them have range attacks, so yes, you might want to sort of add that on to that. But for the most part, they're weird. They're alien. They steal your brain or look like little flying saucer things, or just terrible. This guy is just a brain, well, walking around,
Right.
gross looking. Classic sci-fi
Mhm.
stuff,
Well, but
right?
putting the fantasy into science fantasy, you could also give them spells, right? Something like that.
So, oh yeah. I mean, I think that's what these guys probably have spells.
So that
Yeah,
might be how your
this one does.
enemies,
The Gauss
how the
rig.
creatures you're creating are able
Yeah.
to deal with foes at range is they just have long range spells.
Mhm, mhm. Well, I was thematically, I guess one of the things I was thinking about, if you're doing a space fantasy, are you doing a disservice to use fantasy creatures in that primarily space fantasy venue? Or should you change them up
I
some?
I mean, I'd just give them either something that says a little bit of
Okay.
space, like you know what I mean. Depending on how intelligent they are, if you're just going for like a beastie, then hey, you're gonna fight this wolf. It has green fur instead of gray fur. It's an alien wolf. You don't necessarily have to use the Tashtari, right? If you want to, or it does something else that's sort of just slightly weird and alien. But if you're also doing something that's intelligent, um, I don't know, for some reason the Sphinx keeps coming to mind, even though I think they can fly. I'm not sure, but like they have a jetpack.
Mhm.
They have a some sort of
Or built-in cybernetics or
laser
whatever
gun,
things that
built-in
yeah.
cybernetics. Yeah. Sphinx with a
Yeah.
cybernetic eyeball. Hey, look, there you go. There's your science
Mhm,
fantasy.
mm.
And a lot of very magical
He's got
creatures
ace.
that are in the monster core, you can kind of describe as more mundane looking aliens that just have cybernetics that let them do what otherwise the magical things are. Um, devils who can see in the dark no matter what, right? Oh, well, that's a person that's got,
Yeah.
some sort of eldritch cybernetics that let them see entirely in the dark. That's in like even magical darkness and the like. They got, just sort of hand wavy. Okay, it's great cybernetics.
I just thought of like just a trick that you can also play in a little bit is and you can maybe use this like once or twice is that you come up against something that is just a classic straight up fantasy monster, right? Here he is, it's a troll and he's attacking you. And then when you defeat the troll and it turns into pixels and it just blah, 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 blah. Oh, you're inside of a gaming rig all along kind of thing. Or it was a hologram all along and it was just seemed very real, and then that becomes part of like what you do. Oh, where are you? You're in a weird hollow arcade. That you're actually in a fantasy game inside the
Right.
arcade
So
kind of
it's like a
situation.
hard light troll or something, but,
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, you don't even necessarily need to worry about like, oh, what is how are holograms
Yeah.
act in Starfinder Second Edition when you go to fight them? Oh, they incorporeal style, blah blah. You just say, oh, so just use the stats as normal, but when you kill it, it blinks away. Instead of just leaving a
This is a
corpse.
good. I want to key off of this, but it's going to sound like I'm taking the long way around. In my monster advice, um, even if you've got for the monsters that you use, there's the monster core, but also keep in mind that there's a really robust set of other monsters that show up in all kinds of Pathfinder Second Edition products. Right now, I'm running
Yeah.
Season of Ghosts, and I will be sort of minimally spoiler for the Season of Ghosts adventure path, but I've been looking at the monsters that are in the back of the adventure path, and a lot of them are a type of special fiend called Nindorus. Nindorus are creatures
Mm.
that have been evil creatures caught up in the cycle of reincarnation and have broken that cycle of reincarnation to become monsters that feed on others. And sort of how it's been. There's a bunch of different kinds based on how the cycle's been broken and how they want to how they want to trick or assault people. But one of the things that's really neat, kind of graphically, about that is even though these creatures all look very different, frog-like or just animate bundles of hair or whatever, a lot of them have blood red butterflies. They either pour out of their mouths or pour out of their wounds. All this is just the monster description, which are really evocative. So I
Right.
kind of thought, all right, well, if I'm going to be making monsters for Starfinder, let's look at some of the things that maybe would be a surprise to players, even players that knew Pathfinder Second Edition very well. Well, you could kind of pull these things out, and what is the cycle um, of reincarnation look like? Well, maybe it's like video game characters that kind of get played and die and played and die and played and get some sort of malevolent sentience. And the red butterflies are like red pixels that come out when they create because they've got. So when you started talking about the, maybe they're video game characters, like, oh, well, that could actually layer on top of a set of sort of niche monsters that you're able to add a great deal of sort of sci-fi flavor to.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It all sort of, depends on what kind of campaign it is that you're running, right? It might make you might be doing a more of a Mad Max out in the wasteland kind of sort of thing, right, on Akaton, right? You're not necessarily going to use these kind of like that kind of specific tweak, but you've got other plenty different things that you can do that can use other, reskin monsters in a way that's like, oh, this guy, for the most part, the now I've forgotten what they're called. Akeshti
Yeah.
are essentially lizard folk, right? We've got plenty of Aruxi stat blocks. You can just use basically so that, or serpent folk stat blocks, and be like, oh, these guys are sand, wasteland serpent people. Great,
How do you
perfect,
do the
brilliant.
spitting blood from their eyes? That's the coolest thing that Akeshtis do.
You just
There's
do
your
a little
ranged
range attack,
attack, right?
little blood spit, little blood eye.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is the sci-fi part of it, but it's still kind of a science fantasy. So how do you make it sci-fi magical, but different from fantasy magical? Or is there a difference?
Yeah, very much
It's
so.
real, yeah.
One of the ways to do that is to just look. If you just pull open your the Starfinder Second Edition playtest book, it's got all the spells that are new, and they kind of kick you back to the player core for all the other spells. Well, any creature that does any of the spells that are new and unique to Starfinder Second Edition themselves become kind of Starfinder monsters, right? A Pathfinder monster could do that if you ported it back the other way, but somebody that's doing sort of a bouncing force disc or making a comm unit chime in order to give you like a bunch of bonuses to because you feel
Yeah.
all heroic. Those things sort of automatically feel very Starfinder appropriate science fantasy, and are probably good
Mhm.
candidates to maybe just add to a new monster that you're creating or swap in for a monster that you're sort of upgrading from Pathfinder to Starfinder.
Hmm.
There's also a little bit of like that you can do with just sort of general color, essentially, for what a
Right.
monster is doing and how it acts. If it again, this sort of works more on sort of intelligent creatures, right? You just have them being more modern, right? There's nothing, and granted, when I'm like running a troll on it or anything, I'm not necessarily thinking about like, how would a troll talk in semi fake medieval times? No, I'm not going like fie onto you. I'm sort of doing like, you got me, haha. But of course, if you're just sort of like playing in a science fantasy, they could be just a little more. I mean, especially Starfinder's a little more irreverent, a little more pop culture in a lot of ways too. You can do it, do stuff with the monsters, and when they are, you're walking through the streets of Absalom Station, and you're just sort of running into some, again, I keep going to lizard folk or whatever, but they're wearing, t-shirts from the, Strawberry Machine Cake's latest tour or whatever. You can
Right.
just be like, yeah, they're in the world, they're in that world, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Well,
Okay.
that's good things to think about there.
Yeah. What about you, John? What do you think?
Yeah, we've done a lot of talking, John. All you've done is ask some
Yeah.
questions.
But yeah, because I'm
That's
getting some
real
help here.
suspicious.
Yeah. Well, so I think for me, what I'm considering is that there should be a mix of these, right? So have some throwbacks to original Starfinder. Kind of bring them
Yeah.
into second edition. With the basically do some conversions and whatnot. And some of them you don't have to. Like you remember the Akatas? that we ran
Yeah.
into in Dead Suns,
Yep.
they're in the Monster Corps.
Yep.
So that, we can see our good old friends real easy,
I mean, yeah, they've always been
yeah.
in both systems,
Yeah.
essentially.
So I think that's,
Battlesons and Void Zombies.
that's kind of fun. You can modernize some of the things, so you think of, as Jason kind of pointed to, about undead and things like that, and, give them newer equipment, newer spells or whatever. And again, we saw in Dead Suns, there was a vampire, a modern day vampire in there, so you had some of that. But also, I think creating something completely different that just really fits the space fantasy feel, something that looks unlike any creature that you would see in normal fantasy, and coming up with something new that thematically, kind of fits where you're at. It doesn't have to be horror related. I remember, Ron, in your, was it the Dead City,
Blind
where
City.
you came, the Blind
Volume
City, right?
4 of
You
Dead
came up,
Suns.
yeah.
No.
You brought in
Volume 4 of
Blind,
Dawn of
The Dawn
Flame.
of Flame.
Dawn of
Yeah,
Flame,
not
yeah,
Dead Suns.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Different
you had
sun.
some interesting things in there, that were kind of brought in. Yeah, so I'm thinking a mix, and I guess what I'm fearful of, what I was concerned about, and the reason why I want to talk to you guys is I don't want to just like reskin Pathfinder creatures and just change them a little bit and put them in Starfinder. I think Starfinder deserves bigger differences than just that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, if you've got the time to do that now,
Yeah.
go
Mhm.
for it, right? Like for your campaign, if you're still running the playtest, and you still want
Right.
to, you've gone through all the material, or you want to just come up with something new, it's not that difficult to just, again, create a monster. We did it a couple months ago. And sort of using sort of the architecture of Pathfinder Second Edition, you can
Right.
create new things. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with when you're making a Pathfinder monster. You kind of want it to be unique and have a thing
Right.
that it does that maybe nothing else does. Sometimes you want just basic stuff too. If you need a basic brute, it does this, it does sudden charge, it hits really hard and has a big axe, and that's its sort of shtick, and that's good, and that's fine. But sometimes you want something weird and cool, like, oh, this is some kind of unusual dragon, so it's got to be able to do X, Y, and Z. You got to come up with something new that
A laser dragon, of
fits into
course. Yeah, we need
a
the
laser
laser.
dragon. You got to have a laser dragon, of course. It shoots its laser breath, and it, what does that mean? Like, is that just fire? Well, no, you could spice it up and have it be that it's
Right.
so, it's not just, it's such a forceful laser blast, and yes, it does fire damage, but it also just, it pushes you back 5 feet, or dazzles you or
5.
something like that, right?
Yeah, and this actually brings up something else. Damage types, right? So you have kind of set damage types in the
Yeah.
Pathfinder Second Edition, the remastered stuff. Is that enough? Those damage types? Should there be anything in addition in Starfinder Second Edition?
No.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I think there are plenty. I
Is
will,
that plenty? Is that enough?
there
Yeah.
are there are a plenty. There's
Yeah,
all the
I know. I've been
energies,
looking at them. Been looking at them.
vitality, void, sonic, force, all that stuff is I think pretty much everything you would need.
Well, and I think it is clever to have plasma damage in Starfinder First Edition be a combination
Right.
of fire and electricity. And I think that there's
Mhm.
more combos that can feel very sci-fi or magic in things,
That's what
right?
I was thinking.
If
Yeah.
something does sonic and void damage, right, together, it's sort of the call of nothingness that's maybe,
Right.
Mhm.
can be super interesting. I do want to. Although I agree with you, Jason, I do want to make sure that we're not losing sight of the former. When you say it can be something that's sort of the standard critter for what you need, or something crazy like a laser dragon. One of the things that was really hard to communicate as a developer, hard to communicate to freelancers, is along the lines of, look, if I want you to give me some kind of big hound hill giants use, this is not an opportunity to create the craziest, most unusual monster
Sure.
there is around. Sometimes it's just got to be a big dog, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
But it's
Exactly.
also the fact that writing a monster book is hard. Writing monsters for a monster book is hard because you don't have the context. The monster's theme has to create the context. The narrative around it
Mhm.
has to say the sort of has to imagine the kind of context in which it can be used. Taking a monster that you're writing for a specific adventure or a specific adventure path, or even your specific table in a dangerous place that they're in, is actually kind of a lot easier because you can skip a lot of the steps of making it sort of universal in some way. It can
Mhm.
be all about what is the monster needed to do at this time in the narrative.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and that's actually something I've been thinking about is how do you tie in these new creatures, right? That you're however you're coming putting them together for your campaign. How do you tie them in closely with the whatever context you're building as well? I think that becomes very important,
Mm.
for doing that. And so I'm trying to be very thoughtful as I'm thinking about different aspects of it, especially if it's a new context that I'm thinking about. How do I bring that into kind of existing monsters to make them fit a new context? I want to do that.
Mm.
So, like, I really like post-apocalyptic kind of adventure situations. So, how would you put in take a monster there and how it's affected? Think of like Fallout, right? How the
Yes, I was just
creatures
saying
all
Fallout.
affected, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
there is very different, um, than maybe if you see that creature in a different context. So,
Yeah. It's like you're saying, Ron. It's tricky to know what yeah, the monster's entry has to create the context, but in a way, it's not. Sometimes you just pick a thing. You just pick a context, right? Oh, I need to make this this is definitely a desert monster, and I don't
right.
necessarily, it doesn't have to be applicable to every biome, essentially, right?
Yep,
Some
it's
things
true.
are and some things aren't, but they, it's a desert. And then no, oh, they're saying, oh, it's a desert monster. I'm not gonna use it. Or if I've got it, I get it later on, and I need, like, this is kind of what I need. Does the what I like, but it's the right, it's the right level and all that. But it's a desert monster. But I'm having a tundra adventure. That's when you just need to reskin it yourself and just be like, oh, it's cold. This is cold, and it can swim through the snow instead of the sand or whatever. It's I think that, as long as things aren't like so super specific, then it's not too difficult to tweak.
Yeah.
Kind of anything.
You can also build monsters that have their own sort of built-in hooks. I'm thinking of something like
Mhm.
the Nereid, right? With the one that makes the water, uh, sort of the water fae that has like this shawl that they make. And somebody who gets a
Mhm.
hold of the shawl, they want to get it back at all costs. They'll do what the shawl holder says. The number of sort of adventure stories that came out thereafter, the number of adventures in which these creatures appeared that had the hook of somebody bad took their shawl and now they have to do bad
Yeah.
things at this person's behest to try to get it back, or they don't want to do those things and they need the adventurers to help them get it back, becomes kind of a hook that you can use in a lot of different settings.
Mm,
And
mhm,
I've seen it in, from forests to coastal to,
Mhm.
to dark lands to everything,
Mhm.
because it's got kind of a built-in hook. So if you're when you talk about post-apocalyptic, I think one of the things to think about post-apocalyptic is stuff breaks down, and so it's easy to have a monster that counts on stuff, right? Maybe cybernetics, maybe something else that is broken down and has the monster sort of out on a quest in order to fix its
Mhm.
cybernetic eye
Mhm.
or cybernetic limb
mhm,
or what have you. And that's the thing that brings it into whatever conflict needs to be in conflict, right?
right.
Yeah.
Well, so we have some cybernetic creatures in Starfinder, right? You have cybernetic golems, cybernetic zombies, kind of as monster entries, right? We've had,
Mhm.
but you can make cybernetic anything,
Mhm.
Sure.
right? Really?
Yeah.
So I guess what I wonder is then should cybernetic just be a creature trait rather than an
You could make it.
aspect of a creature?
You could make it like a template, like too, like if you
Yeah.
got
Mhm.
we can elite. You could make, and I think, um, I feel like in Howl of the Wild there was some weird ones too. Like you could make a giraffe tiny. But like, yeah, cybernetic might be a, template that's easy. It does that. Maybe it takes a little more electricity damage, but it's strong against something else, mental damage or something, and there you go. I mean, like, give it a weird laser eye attack, and you're done.
Yeah, the other thing that it might be is not strengths or weaknesses or attacks the creature has, but something like a trait like that can also be a way in which the players interact with it. It could be that if something has the cybernetic trait, that means it has lootable cyberware of some kind, right?
Yeah, that's it.
And
Yeah,
so if a
What?
creature has a cybernetic trait, maybe there is a chance you can actually get its, whatever, maybe it's got Mag Attack instead of Cyber
Right.
Attack or something.
Right.
But whatever it is, it's built into the creature's sort of treasure allocation as lootable.
Mm-hmm.
So
And you could probably hack it as well,
yep.
the creature, right? Somehow,
yeah.
and those different type of attack and things. Yeah, I just when you mentioned the cybernetic thing, I'm thinking, there's so many other different type of creature traits you have out there, and in Starfinder, maybe we should have or maybe we should have some that would be applicable across both. But like there are androids in Pathfinder, or maybe androids had the cybernetic trait or something.
Let me hook the last three ideas all together in something.
Okay.
And if you've got some sort of creature who has cybernetics, but the nature of their cybernetics is that it's easily hackable, right? Then one of the concerns is that the players or other NPCs could sort of hack the monster to make it do things in that sort of narrated way, and
Yeah.
have treasure that is sort of acquirable by the characters when they're done, and give the impetus for the monster to be out trying to fix what it's got that's broken that makes it too easily hackable or something like that.
Yeah, it's cool.
Mix and match all these things together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. To like kind of answer your question, no, well, answer your statement there, John. I just went and made sure because the cybernetic zombie is in Second Contact, the second edition version, and it has the tech trait, which
Oh,
is
okay.
the
Tech.
item type. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is, that's sort of I had a feeling they had some sort of trait to sort of denote that spells that affect technology can affect this thing,
Right.
right?
Oh,
Essentially,
like robots might have the tech trait. If they're constructs with the tech
robots. I
trait,
mean, yeah, all the robots also have the tech trait.
yeah.
Yes, they do. Yeah. I don't know if they.
Well, and I think the robots can have tech and construct, right? Those are
They have
separate traits.
technically they have
Well, construct is
construct
their
robot
type,
tech.
right?
Well, there's no such thing as that
Well,
anymore. But they're all
sorry,
you don't have to have those. Like there are those that sort of
global creature groups.
go on with it. There are also global creature groups, constructs and undead and so forth. But necessarily not a creature does not need to necessarily have them.
Right.
You could try. I'm trying to think if there's anything that exists that doesn't have one of these creature type
In the
traits.
Pathfinder Bestiary 3, there's like a roiling incant, which is an animated spell, basically, that does not have any of the existing creature types.
I think I wrote that one
Did
actually.
you? There you go. You answered
Yeah.
your
You
own
broke
question
the
years
system.
ago.
Yeah, I did it a while back. But yeah, there you go. That's something that's just like pure magic. Yeah, it would right
Right.
now it would probably have the arcane, divine, occult, or primal trait, but it necessarily doesn't need to have it doesn't need to be an aberration or an ooze or anything like that. It could just be nothing. It could be nothing.
I'm not even gonna. I think even without looking it up, it has the arcane trait. You also predicted that way back when. There you go.
Man, I was asked. It was I think it was Liz's idea, and I said, "Oh, let me do it because that's something that's actually it reminded me of something from Eberron way back in the day. There were these like living spells basically, and you could have just like it's a fireball and it's just there it's a fireball all the time and it's coming at you, right? Bad news. Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground on this. We were very specific before when we talked about our turkey Terminator thing. But yeah, so this has personally been very helpful. That's the main reason I wanted the topic here. But hopefully some of our audience really cared about it as well. So.
Well, we'll see. We know when whatever book comes out.
Whenever what happens, yes.
And see what the Starfinder team is doing with new and weird monsters.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm John.
And I'm Ron.
And I'm Jason, and this has been Digital Divination.